You're listening to the Turn Autism Around podcast, episode number 229. Today, I have a very special guest, Dr. Scott Geller, who has a PhD. He's an alumni, distinguished professor, has completed 53 years as a teacher and a researcher in the Department of Psychology at Virginia Tech. And he is just a wealth of information. He has spent over 5 decades trying to get the principles of positive psychology, the principles of a movement he started called Actively Caring for People movement. He's been trying to get these procedures out to the world. A lot of the procedures you hear me talking about on my podcast and my courses and my books about using 8 positives to every negative and those kind of principles. But he has such a wealth of information and so many examples. Love this episode. Let's get to this great interview with Dr. Scott Geller. All right, Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited.
Thank you, Mary. What a pleasure to be here. It's all about dissemination. We have to teach people how to apply these principles.
Yeah. So before we get to the principles and the movement that you're a big part of, and I know you're not specifically in the autism world, so describe your fall into the world of ABA, positive psychology, whatever you fell into and where you're at now.
Well, I'm a professor of psychology at Virginia Tech, and this is my 54th year.
Wow.
So I started in 1969. And back then, I learned applied behavior analysis back at Analyst Hospital with Nate Ione and Ted Azerin. That's where I learned this stuff. I was in the Department of Psychology at SIU in Carbondale, and I just happened to visit Analyst Hospital. And so I was hired at Virginia Tech to be a cognitive psychologist. And I did my dissertation in cognitive psychology. But then it hit me. We're not making a difference with cognitive psychology. We're not helping people change their behavior and change others to do the right thing. So I visited Analyst Hospital, saw what they were doing. And the first thing I did at Virginia Tech was take some of these basic principles of applied behavior analysis. By the way, I call it applied behavioral science. Took those principles to increase environmental responsible behavior. How do we influence people to recycle, to do the right thing for the environment? That was back in 1969. Wow. But that's how it started. And then slowly moved on. I became editor of JABA, which is a Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, in I have to think about that. Yeah, 1979.
Wow.
And for 3 years. So the bottom line is, I really got involved in this process of using science to make a difference in our world, from the home with children to the real world with changing the environment, getting people to do the right thing for the environment, for example. Much of my work.
And I'm kind of I'm happy to hear that you're so broad and you didn't get just in the developmental disability world, but I can't imagine as editor of JABA and having all this experience in psych hospitals and stuff that you didn't. How much experience did you have with developmental disabilities and children with autism, if any?
None. Zero. My degree was not in clinical psychology. See, my degree was in cognitive psychology. And then I learned, and then again, when I became editor of JABA, what I wanted to do is make JABA be broader than just developmental disabilities. So I focused on how do we use behavior analysis to improve driving? How do we use it in industry to make people do the right thing for safety and health? So the bottom line is, I use the principles are the same, whether we apply them to autism, we apply them in schools or whatever. The basic principles are the same, but it's the application.
Wow, that's great. Before we hit record, I told you that I have a master's degree in nursing administration, and before I became a mom and became a behavior analyst, when I was a nurse, I did research in the nursing field and on things like, because I was nursing administration, on things like nursing retention, time management, shift to shift report. I didn't know what ABA was. I didn't know what organizational behavior management, which is a part of ABA, was, but I used the science of ABA or ABS before I even knew what it was. And the other thing I want to say is that a lot of people credit the whole field of ABA as starting with the article about the psychiatric nurse. And I would love to hear, because I'm a little fuzzy on the details of that, but I'm sure being in that, around that time, I'm sure you're very familiar with it. We could link that in the show notes here for podcast 229. But can you tell us about that article, like the title of it, the kind of the year or years?
Who are the authors of it? What are we talking about? What article?
Psychiatric nurse as behavioral engineer. You're not familiar with it?
No, and well, I know the name. I wonder if this was, how about a token economy written by Nate Azrin and Ted Ione? Using tokens to manage the behavior in an institution. It's very similar, is it not? It's using these principles to improve behavior.
Right. I almost feel like that article was in the psych hospital where Ted Ione and that,
right,
those people were. So we're going to link that article in the show notes, and we can link the article about token economy too. But I think it's a good point to remember that ABA and behavioral science was not created for kids with autism. And it's largely, like all behavior analysts know, in a lot of situations now, especially the thousands and thousands of people that have been board certified since 2000.
In fact, that's a very important point. Some people see it as a very narrow kind of science, but it is very broad. In fact, I don't like the term analysis. We don't only analyze behavior, we intervene to improve behavior. So I prefer the term applied behavioral science. Now, for example, I've spent years taking those principles into the real world, into the workplace, to keep people safe. And we've reduced fatalities and injuries using these same basic principles. So I hear you. We need to sometimes realize that these principles can be applied in many situations.
Yeah. Well, and you have a wealth of background in the broad science for sure. So I see behind you, and I have done a little research, and you have the actively caring movement for people movement. Can you tell our listeners and me when that started, what that's about? Is that you founded it? What is it?
Well, let's start with the term actively caring. Start with that. Many of us care. We hear of a shooting, we hear of a tragedy, and we care. But do we do something about it? And that's why we came up with the word actively caring. Notice too that active is behavior. Caring is often linked to humanism. So I believe the academic term, what we're talking about is humanistic behaviorism. That's not a new term. It was really rather popular in the 70s, but it kind of fell off. So now back to the movement. We had a tragedy at Virginia Tech, April 16th, 2007. There was a shooting. One student killed 32 faculty and students. Of course, I was here at the time. And after that tragedy, the caring was amazing. People were calling me up. I've got literally hundreds of emails saying, "Are you okay?" Because people were concerned. And then we realize, okay, that's wonderful that we care, but how are we going to prevent it from happening again? We have to do something now, something proactively before the tragedy happens again. Now, by the way, back then, a shooting like that was unusual. These days, it's all ho hum, another shooting. So it's if we could only get these concepts out to the real world. So we started a movement, the Actively Caring for People movement, AC4P, the number 4. In fact, there's a website, activelycaringforpeople.org. And at that website, you can buy a wristband. And the wristband says, Actively Caring for People. And when you see an act of kindness, the idea is you pass this on to thank them. In fact, it can be summarized STEP, step, S, see an act of kindness, T, thank them for that. We don't have enough supportive feedback out there. We pick on the mistakes that people make. We give corrective feedback, but we don't give enough supportive feedback. So here we go. See an act of kindness, thank them. And then E means enter this. Each wristband, by the way, has its own identification number. So you go to the website, AC4P, and you enter the act of kindness. The idea is to spread some positive gossip for a change instead of all this negative stuff going on. In fact, I wonder if the school shooting is partly observational learning. It's become part of our culture to bring out a gun and shoot somebody. So, and by the way, and then the P of step, you pass on this wristband. So once you give it to somebody, you pass it on to somebody else, and it keeps going. And by the way, I'm wearing a blue wristband. Police officers in 3 states wear blue wristbands. And we've written a book for police officers. They do the same thing, except it's blue. It's called Actively Caring for People Policing. And they can go to their website and do the same thing that we do with our website. So again, it's something the world needs. We need to give more positive consequences for the good things we do. You heard this, if you see something, say something. People see something all the time. How about saying some positive things about the good things that people do? So that's our movement. And if you go to that website, you'll see thousands of stories, not enough, but people have done this. And I give them to my students at the university. I'm still here and I talk about this movement because we've got to spread it. Dissemination is key. And thank you for letting me say something about it, because maybe some of your listeners will like to get involved. Everybody can get involved. Just do it.
Yeah. I do have a couple podcasts that I've done in the past, one with a police officer, a captain who has a son with autism. So we can link that. And then I also did a podcast interview with Bridget Taylor, who's a pretty renowned behavior analyst. And she did some work on, being more humanistic and being more caring as a behavior analyst. We can link those two in the show notes. We'll also link the Actively Caring for People website so that you can look at that. And you did say that you have a book on policing, and I know you have several books. When did this movement start?
2007.
Okay.
And I started to write books. Here's what I have for parents. Actively Caring. It has the same basic principles, but it's customized for parents. We have for police officers, for schools. We have a book for schools to reduce the violence and the conflict going on in schools. But my point is the same basic concepts that are the foundation.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the 7 principles of the Actively Caring movement for people movement. And you just held up a book, Actively Caring for Children. Is that what it says?
Your child, Actively Caring for Your Child.
Yep. And
that's, of course, the stuff, how to be a more effective parent.
Yeah. And, this has nothing to do with autism. My toddler preschooler course, for instance, has half the participants don't have a child with a diagnosis of autism. They have speech delays. They have concerns, maybe. They're in long waiting lists, but the same exact procedures work beautifully with typically developing kids. I just interviewed last week's podcast, interviewed Kyle Joan Sherman, and she said she uses the shoebox program and all the techniques for her 8-month-old grandchild and
Yeah.
her 5-year-old grandchild who are typically developing. So I really resonate with, all that you stand for, that these basic procedures need to be disseminated as principles. So let's go over the 7 principles of the actively caring for people movement that literally could help a child, help a family, help the police department, help schools, help teachers, help behavior analysts. So I'm going to read each principle and then you can say, anything you want about it. So the first principle is to employ more positive consequences.
Now, isn't that just something that's so obvious? Your common sense says that, but we don't do it. In fact, we teach supportive feedback is a way to make people feel competent. And when you feel competent at something worthwhile, you're more likely to be self-motivated. That's a powerful term, self-motivated. And researchers have demonstrated that if you feel competent, now how do you help a person feel competent? Supportive feedback. Focus on the positive. The best way to eliminate an undesirable behavior is pay attention to desirable behavior. Put the focus there. I've published articles on reducing violence and conflict in schools. And you know how we did it? We simply had the teacher ask the students what they've done to help another person. What positive things have put the focus on helping others rather than bullying others. So we've reduced bullying by simply turning around and focus on the positive side.
Yeah. And I've done a ton of work on the work of Dr. Glenn Latham, who wrote Positive Parenting back in like 1994 or 97. And then Behind the Schoolhouse Door, 8 Skills Every Teacher Needs. In my new Train the Trainer program, we are diving deep into those principles. We can link the Behind the Schoolhouse Door right here for free. And a lot of his work is just focusing on the positives, and 8 positives to every negative. This has nothing to do with autism. If you go to pick a daycare or a school program and classroom A has a bunch of negatives, stop that. We're going to lose recess. I'm going to take that jump rope away. You're not sitting crisscross applesauce. You're touching your neighbor. Stop that. Negative, 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 negative. You go into classroom B and it's, I like the way you shared. There's thumbs up, there's smiles, there's everybody, just having a pleasant time. It's just common sense. Like you said, you're going to pick classroom B. You're going to pick work environment B. You're going to pick a job interview that is more positive. This is nothing to do with autism, but so much to do with changing behavior. We want to spend 95% of our time preventing problem behaviors. Everybody wants to, like, what should I do? My child's on the floor. Well, by the time your child's on the floor, we're in a no-win situation. We need to get the child up and safe. Yes. And then we need to spend 95% of our time making sure that dropping to the floor doesn't become part of his, ritual daily or weekly, because we really need to focus on safety. So I love the whole more positive, consequences is very much in line with what I do.
But when we see a negative consequence, it sticks out. The child's on the floor. We pay attention to that. But when the child is not on the floor, doing the right thing, focused on something else, we let it alone. We need to learn to support that stuff that we see that we appreciate.
Yeah. And Glenn Latham also did some research back in like 70s that showed that kids in special education got 15 negatives to every positive. And so a lot of times when if you're a professional out there and you're doing independent evals or you have really tough kids, I would really recommend you sit back and take positive to negative data. And a lot of times you can turn things around by flipping that to more positives than negatives.
Absolutely.
All right. Let's move on to principle number 2. We benefit from observational learning. If you want to learn something, watch someone performing the task.
Isn't that, I mean, talk about common sense. I mean, when I started at Virginia Tech, I didn't know how to teach effectively. What did I do? I got in the mail in my campus phone book and looked up all the faculty who had won teaching awards. And I called them up and I asked them, could I come to your class and sit in the back and watch you teach? Why would you want to do that? I teach biology. You're in psychology. I want to watch your techniques. I want to learn from you. You are an award-winning teacher. The bottom line is we learn by watching others. Here's another thing to recognize. People see us do what we're doing. And when we're practicing the right thing, people see us. I mean, you've heard the term vicarious reinforcement or vicarious punishment, means indirect. So when we see somebody getting rewarded for doing the right thing, we're more likely to do the right thing also. So the idea is we need to demonstrate. We need to show people. Yes, and I sometimes wonder if some of the tragedies we're having today in our world is because people are watching through social media. They see this negative stuff, and the negative stuff is getting all this public attention. I want attention. I want to be on TikTok with this anyway. So we need to turn that around.
Yeah, definitely. And just to take it down to like a preschooler that you're trying to teach how to put their coat on. Let's watch a typically developing preschooler put their coat on and break down the steps and teach the steps. It's not just like fingers crossed, hopefully that skill will be acquired. Of course, you're going to want to look. I love the idea of going into, very fluent, top award-winning professors to see how to teach. I love that. Okay. Principle number 3, improve with behavioral feedback.
Wow. Practice makes perfect. No, it doesn't. Practice makes permanence. If we're not getting feedback on how well we're doing, we'll just continue doing what we're doing. Matter of fact, we've studied coaches on this campus, wrestling coaches, for example, and we've observed them giving feedback. And what do we find? They give corrective feedback. They tell the athlete when they're doing wrong, but not necessarily specific enough. But when they do well, they say, good job. They don't tell them what they saw that was notable, that was recognizable. So the point is, feedback is critical. What am I doing well? I ask students, how am I doing? You're doing great, Doc. No. Specifically, what did I do well today? And where is there room for improvement? There's always room for improvement. Again, the point is, without feedback, we can't improve. And so, but do we have the courage to give feedback? Here's a term, by the way, that's floating around. It's old wine in a new bottle, psychological safety. Have you heard that term, Mary? Psychological safety. Do you have the kind of culture, even in your home, where everybody's willing to speak up and offer advice? Can you challenge the status quo? Can you give feedback? And again, that takes a particular kind of environment, an openness, a sense of trust and transparency. So it's easier said than done, but let's stop with the point that we can't improve without feedback.
Mm-hmm. When you were talking about coaching, I thought of another podcast interview I did with Teresa McKeon from Tag Teach, which is marking good behavior when it's happening. We can link that in the show notes as well. The fourth one is pretty much related to all these others. Use more supportive than corrective feedback.
Absolutely.
By
the way, let's look at the letters of coach and see how it relates to all of this.
Okay.
First letter is a C. Care. Know that I care about your improvement. You'll care what I know. And I care so much, I'm willing to, the next letter, observe, watch you, and give you feedback. And while I'm watching you, the A in coach, I'm analyzing. I'm looking around to see what consequences are influencing that behavior, whether it's right or wrong behavior. What's influenced? Behavior doesn't happen in a vacuum, as we all know. There are environmental consequences. So that's the analyze. Now, after I analyze, now the next C, I communicate. I give the feedback. And again, as this lesson says, start with positive. Give more positive feedback. When you give corrective feedback, this is challenging, not so easy. You can't, that's wrong. That's a turn off. You have to be, here's the word, humanistic. What I mean is ask more questions. Is there a better way to do that? Could that have been more safe? Again, get them to say, yeah, I could have done better, Mom. I could have done this more safely, Supervisor. I mean, if they say it, you're getting their commitment. And so the bottom line, well, I might tell you that that is the foundation of what we started back at Virginia Tech in 1979 called behavior-based safety. Having workers observe each other with a checklist of safe and at-risk behaviors. And by the way, the next letter of coach is H, help. If you do this process, you will help them. But what I wanted to say is it got big. Behavior-based safety is worldwide, except guess what they do? They leave out that C. They don't communicate. They observe behavior, put it on their computers. Now they can put up data, percent safe versus, so that it's better than nothing. But that C part, the communication part, peer-to-peer communication, that takes some courage. And that takes some lessons on how do we do it. So that's the one weak link that's happened with behavior-based safety as it's spread worldwide.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, principle number 5, embrace and practice empathy.
Wow. Now we're humanistic, aren't we? If we only would embrace empathy. What do we mean? I asked a worker the other day, what is empathy? And his response was, isn't that just sympathy? No, empathy is trying to see it from the other person's perspective. Imagine if we became more empathic, if we listened with empathy. Here's an example. What's the golden rule? Treat others the way I want to be treated. That's the golden rule, right? What if the other person does not want to be treated the way you want to be treated? I suggest the platinum rule. Treat others the way they want to be treated. But that takes empathy. I have to find out, how do you want to be treated? When I was in 5th grade, the teacher in front of the class recognized me for doing the best job on my homework. Would Scotty Geller please stand? Oh, I was very shy anyway. I stood up and she said, I want you all to give Scotty a hand because his homework was the best. The kids beat me up on the playground.
Oh,
I did not want public recognition, but we heard that slogan, reprimand privately, recognize publicly. I mean, it's some of that pop psychology out there that is absolutely wrong. So empathy gets to the bottom line here. How does the other person see it? Where are they coming from? So when we get feedback, you be empathic about it.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. Okay, lesson or principle number 6, manage behavior and lead people.
Oh, yeah. There's a difference between management and leadership. And by the way, we need both. Managers hold us accountable. Managers get their position assigned. We have a department head in this, she holds me accountable. That's fine. Parents hold their children accountable. Teachers hold their students accountable. That's management. That's management. In the academic world, we call that transactional leadership.
Mm-hmm.
I just call it management. What's leadership? Leadership is different. And the first point to be made is everybody can be a leader. And I suggest, what do leaders do? They inspire self-motivation. They inspire others to be self-motivated. And what do I mean? The research has said that self-motivation is influenced by 3 C words: choice, competence, community. What do I mean? When I believe that I have some choice in the matter, I'm more likely to be self-motivated. Example, suppose you have a child and you want them to dress up for school in a particular outfit. One thing the parent could do is say, we're wearing this today, son or daughter, whatever. How about this though? These are two possible outfits for the day. Which one do you want to wear? Just some choice in the matter. So again, perceived choice. The second one is competence. I said this earlier. When you believe you're competent at doing worthwhile work, I'm more motivated. So how do we do that? We've said this, supportive feedback. And the third word is community. Now, the people who did the research, DC and Ryan, Ed DC, Richard Ryan, they did this research years to show that these three terms, they don't use the word community, they use the word relatedness, recognizing we're all in this together, related. I like community because I can remember 3 C words. Now, when I say community, what do I mean? I mean interdependency. It should be the declaration of interdependent, not independent, not I can do it myself. We're all in this together. I call it systems thinking. We all help each other. Here's a word, synergy. You know what synergy means. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. How do we make that happen? The whole, by having diversity, diverse people on our team working together interdependently, the whole will be greater than the sum of the parts. And again, the key is self-motivation, holding ourselves accountable. And again, how can we make that happen? Giving people the perception, I say the perception of choice. I mean, to get right down to it, choice is a perception. And then competence, believing that I'm good at this. And whatever age we're at, we like to believe we're competent at doing something worthwhile. How do we do that? Supportive feedback. And then again, a sense of synergy, a sense of community.
Yeah, I love that. And, I've been in work environments where you feel like, there's 50 behavior analysts or 50 workers. And if you don't have the right leader, it can get very catty and you feel like, oh, I'm in the bad pile now. And those people are in the good pile. And, I just created a PowerPoint and it's very much like black and white thinking, like you're not all bad or all good. You're not high functioning or low functioning. You individually have your strengths, your needs, motivations, history. And so I believe that, anybody can be trained if they're motivated to be trained and they're in the right system that gives positive feedback. And once you start to see gains, whether that's in a child, a supervisee, a police department, the prisoners, once you start to see change and progress, that then becomes a cycle of motivation to improve. And a lot of our systems, the criminal justice system, even the education system and the parenting system have decades of punishment built in.
And again, everybody could inspire somebody else to be self-motivated. And by the way, we can inspire ourselves to be self-motivated if we just reflect on our choices, our competence, and our sense of relatedness or community.
Yeah. All right. The last principle here is progress from self-actualization to self-transference. And you, in your article, which we can link in the show notes about this, you have Maslow's hierarchy. So is it related to that?
Yes. And by the way, everybody knows Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's kind of interesting. And we say, we satisfy our biological needs. Then we climb this ladder and we satisfy safety and secure. And then one more, we have our social needs. And then we get to self-esteem. I feel worthwhile. And then the top is self-actualization. When I talk to groups and I ask, what's at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Self-actualization. Guess what? No. Abraham Maslow passed away in 1970, and he said he was wrong. His last book was published by his wife in 1971, entitled The Farthest Reaches of Human Nature. And he said, the best you can be is not about yourself. The best you can be is to go beyond yourself for somebody else. Self-transcendence. I also should say, though, that Maslow didn't like the hierarchy idea. It's not really, you can be hungry and still care for somebody else. I mean, you don't have to satisfy all these needs in order to get to the top. They all kind of work together. And that's the way he talked about it. But again, we like to simplify it. So we got this hierarchy, but if we just recognize the fact that looking out for somebody else, helping somebody else, in fact, feeding your pet, that's going beyond yourself for something else. What if we just realize that? And by the way, talk to people who have done that. They're happy. Happiness happens when we see ourselves helping other people. Mm-hmm. And of course, that relates to a whole other topic, positive psychology.
Yeah. And I know about positive psychology, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert. And so how would you relate positive psychology to applied behavior analysis and the actively caring movement? Like, where is it? Is it the umbrella term? Is it what?
That's a great question, Mary. That brings it all together. If you think about it, first, let me say that Marty Seligman started this thing over 20 years ago called positive psychology. Here's his point. When you hear the word psychology, what do you think of? Negative, helping people who need help. Maybe even you think about that with applied behavior analysis. We're helping people who need help. We're improving emotions, improving behavior. But what's the flip side? How can we help people be happier? What can we do to increase, here's the word they use, subjective well-being? I feel better about myself. And guess what? The principles we've just gone over relate directly to improving subjective well-being. What's the first one? Improve more positive consequences. Use more positive consequences. And self-motivation. And helping people feel they're worthwhile. They're doing worthwhile work. That's happiness. The word, by the way, they use in positive psychology is flow. Go with the flow. And we know what flow means in behavior analysis. We know that flow means you're receiving intrinsic reinforcers. And by the way, the real world thinks intrinsic is inside. No, intrinsic is a natural consequence. So intrinsic reinforcement leads to flow, meaning I'm doing this thing and I'm enjoying this thing. In fact, I missed dinner because I was so involved in the flow of this, meaning I was getting natural consequences, natural positive consequences for my work. So the bottom line is applied behavioral science probably knows more about positive psychology than many others. And one more thing I want to say, we've been doing work on how to increase positive psychology. Here's a simple one, gratitude. How often do people say thank you? We talked about supportive feedback. Not only do you identify what you think, what you saw a person do well, but how about thanking them for it? Thank you for setting the right example. Gratitude is critical. Research has shown when we give gratitude, when we receive gratitude, we're happier. That increases our subjective well-being. So on this campus, for example, we've used behavioral science to increase giving gratitude. Example, when students cross the road on marked sidewalks, the question is, do they thank the driver who has stopped for them? Believe it or not, it's very low. It's 7%. 7%. Again, we're in our own little world. holding our Skinner box in our hand by our cell phone. But guess what? That's a Skinner box. That's an operant chamber. We're pushing buttons to get natural consequences. We don't even look around. We don't even notice that this person stopped for me. So we put up signs at the crosswalk. Thank the driver with a wave. And indeed, we more than tripled the number of people who thanked them. And by the way, now we're studying modeling versus diffusion of responsibility. What do I mean? If the first person in line thanks the driver, is it more or less likely that the second person will thank the driver? Guess what we found?
I would think.
More? I was hoping for more, but instead, I don't have to thank the driver. That person did. So it's diffusion of responsibility. Now, if I'm the last person in line, I'm more likely to thank the driver because the driver waited for me to get there. But the bottom line is, they did it. I don't have to do it. Diffusion of responsibility. In social psychology, they talk about the bystander effect. When someone needs help, what's the probability that any one individual will help this person? And the research says the more people watching this event, the less likely will any one person help that person because of diffusion. Somebody else can do it better than they'll do it. But if you're the only person and somebody needs help, you're more likely to help them.
Yeah, wow. These are all such good principles and such good, life lessons for everything. So why you've been at this for over 5 decades? Why is this common sense, these common sense principles, why is it so hard to disseminate?
Wow. There's a magic word, and that's been my frustration, is dissemination. You know what us professors do? We do our research and we publish it in a journal that nobody reads. Oh, our own colleagues read it, and then we get tenure and we get promoted and so forth. But getting it out to the real world, thank you, Mary, because that's what you do. You help us get out to the real world. We don't do enough of this. By the way, the consultants know how to do that. That's their whole business. But I need a marketer. We need marketers helping us get the word out. And again, that's what you do. And that's why I'm here.
I am a full-time online marketer. And, and I've studied it and I'm continuing to study it. I'm in a mastermind. I want to get these principles out to the world. And I'm very thankful that Amanda Kelly, we were talking recently, and she's going to be on the podcast again in a couple episodes. Well, we were talking about happiness and positive psychology, and she's like, you need to connect with Scott Geller. And I'm like, great, I would love to have him on the podcast. So, we're very much in line. And I think, everybody that's in the actively caring for people movement, all of your students, all of the people that are in my courses and community, we're all singing the same song, and we just need to keep singing it louder to more people. And I love the wristband idea, and we're going to have information in the show notes, but I really appreciate you coming on. So how can people reach you? Your website is?
There's one is Geller, my last name, AC and the number 4P, which stands for Actively Caring for People.org, or .com also works. Okay. But the website where you can actually purchase wristbands, we have them, by the way, we have them in child sizes and adult sizes, and they're available at the ac4p.org. And that's where people report their stories. And again, so grateful. We need this. We need people to know about the movement and to take it on and spread it around. I'm up in age now, and I don't have that many years left. And I need to know that it's about legacy, isn't it? It's about passing it on. And I think life is all about teaching and learning and teaching. And then, of course, Teaching is dissemination, is teaching others. One thing that keeps me going at Virginia Tech is I teach introductory psychology every semester. And I have 500 students in one class and 600 in another class, hoping that some of these lessons that we teach will stick and they'll pass it on.
Yeah, wow. I'm glad you talked about legacy because, when you were talking about self-actualization versus self-transference, and when you were talking about self-transfers, I was thinking legacy, which you and I have that in common, that we really want to get the message out to the world in our lifetime. So, I applaud you for being here. So to wrap up, always end with the same question. So part of my podcast goals are not to just help the kids, but also help parents and professionals be less stressed and lead happier lives. And so what are your specific, I think the whole episode gives lots of gems, but what are your specific self-care and stress management tips that you use that you would recommend?
Well, the first thing is I distinguish between stress and distress. Stress is arousal. And I'm aroused now, but I'm happy about it because I'm in control. And the bad word is distress. The difference between stress and distress is the perception of control. And so it's about being prepared. It's about being prepared and don't get over aroused. And here's, by the way, here's another word that I've been spreading around and teaching, and you know this word, emotional intelligence. It's not IQ, folks, it's EQ. And EQ means, we've talked about EQ, self-motivation, resilience, purpose, have a purpose. Think about the purpose. Think about the consequences you're going to get when you achieve the goals that you've set for the day. And maybe I can end on this. I believe in SMART goals. S, specifically, what are you going to do, right? And smart. M, motivational, not measurable as Zig Ziglar taught us. It's motivational. What will the consequence be when I achieve my goal? So specific, motivational, achievable. I can do that. It's a stretch goal, but I can do this. And R, it's relevant. My goal is relevant to make this world a better place. T, trackable. I'm going to track my progress on my goal. And the last thing, I want to add an S. I use it for share. I want to share my goal with others because maybe they will help me stay accountable. And again, I think it's so important to become self-motivated and to recognize the 3 C's of self-motivation: choice, competence, and community. And Mary, thank you for this opportunity to disseminate. We do nothing if we don't get the word out. By the way, I've studied psychological science, yes, for over 50 years, but it means nothing if people like you do not spread the word in the language that the people can understand and apply.
Yep. We got to change the world, and we're doing it. So thank you so much. All these links, everything we talked about will be at marybarbera.com/229. Thank you so much, Dr. Scott Geller, for joining us today. And I'll see you, and you'll hear me next week, same time, same place.